Hello and welcome to the second edition of our third series of Stu and Coco, where I'm welcoming Roy Smith, main board director of BECK, to the show. We will be talking in this series again about COVID, post-COVID, post-lockdown, challenges to contractors coming out the other side, specifically with regards to some of the challenges that have faced BECK, how BECK have dealt with productivity, and there's some really interesting insights here in terms of Roy's view of the next 12 months. So welcome, Roy.
Thanks, Tony.
That's right, it's a pleasure. So Roy, before we kick off and we talk about some of the questions surrounding COVID and how BECK and yourself have dealt with some of the challenges, which obviously incorporates IR35. For the viewers, can you tell us a little bit more about the business for all of those people who don't know BECK?
Yes, quite a long story, but I'll try and do what I can with it. I mean, we're a 25-year and over 25-year trading business. A year or two, we're awarded the Queen's Award. So it's quite an achievement as a pinnacle for growth where we are. Our turnover exceeded 100 million last year, and our business capability is fast becoming a range between 100 and 150 million. I see that as an optimum scale for us. I think our board is attuned to that level of delivery now. I've been with the company for 7 years. Was an observer to management buyout a few years back, where Chris Galloway took the reins from Lee. I think there was a cultural shift as part of the development and growth of the business, and I think that sort of spurred the change to where we are now. In terms of what we do and where we do it, it's largely hotel projects. We have a split or several splits within the business. You're probably familiar that we have a hotels division.
Yes.
We have an in-house joinery division. At the back of our offices here, we have workshops. Alongside what is the greater offering, I guess, is the what we call our interiors division, which comprises residential and hotels. The scale of that is probably around about, guessing a little bit here, about 80% of the whole in terms of delivery numbers. Where do we do it? Mostly in London.
Roy, is there in terms of, because I know that, you know, in terms of hotels, high-end residential interiors, you're market and class leader. In terms of the international work you do as well, and the museum and very specialist work you do, tell us a little bit more about that briefly.
Well, it's headed up by Mark Banham, one of the owners. There's three principal owners of the business. There's the shares distributed across the board, obviously, but three principal owners. And Mark's been heading that up long before I joined. So I think Mark, like Chris, are probably the best part of 20-year service. I've been around a long time. I've got that fact quite right, I'm not sure, but it's a long time. It's the museum sector is quite special. I mean, I don't believe all of the skill sets that apply to our hotels division can be adopted in the museum sector and otherwise. It is quite separate. But in terms of operating regions, that does take us into the Middle East, to the States, and then nationally over the UK, so they can pop up anywhere. But of course, museums by nature require an awful lot of off-site planning and a short-term delivery.
Yes.
And it's usually the other way around, isn't it, with hotel projects, especially these days. Let's say propensity for clients to choose a design and build route where it's a little bit in the planning and a longer time in delivery, you know.
Yes. With again, with the differences in terms of fabrication, delivery, logistics challenges too.
Exactly,
But I think,
yeah.
but again, what you've highlighted, which was interesting, I think, is with the change of leadership, the evolution of BECK, because for me, BECK's always been, like I said, a class leader in terms of quality of product across its verticals. But I think with Chris being promoted and now at the helm, I think there's definitely an evolution of BECK in being a more user-friendly, collaborative contractor. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I think this came up in a discussion over someone quite recently, and I think we've not had any suggestion of a dispute in any sense with upline or downline for a very long time, and I think that's in this industry. Certainly, earlier in my career, I can recall it having a real desire to go that route, yeah, I think no, it's a more and more projects these days, I think that we're seeing, certainly in the hotel and resi sector, particularly in those two sectors, are going down the design and build route. In fact, I think probably about 70% of our turnover probably is procured that way at the moment. Yeah, and I can only see that growing. I think clients are choosing that one-stop type approach. And I think that one of the key requirements for that form of contracting is to be collaborative, is to work together with client teams and try and develop what it is the client's vision was at the outset, yeah, and to try and get through that journey and at the end actually give him what he thought he was going to get, and
within his budget,
and not allow a team of designers and a team of subcontractors to try and change it so much that he thinks, well, I didn't really buy this,
yeah.
So that's what we're about, and I think if we can work with people to achieve that, that's got to be for the better of everyone.
Yeah, no, agreed, and exciting times. I know that we can't discuss some of the tenders that you're bidding at the moment because they're highly sensitive, but we look forward to press releases and hopefully some really good news within the next month.
Fingers crossed, Tony. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So look, in terms of our agenda and for the viewers, we had 3 or 4 key topics. The first one is how BECK have dealt with the pandemic, the challenges that have been faced, also what innovations those challenges have stimulated for your business. Whether or not IR35 has affected that. Certainly for our business, it has, as obviously one down in the supply chain, but has that affected you guys? And then moving forwards now, as the market spins up again, and we're starting already to see some acute skill shortages and the resultant inflation in terms of salary, which are, are very similar to commodities and product prices, how BECK looks to deal with that, right? With all those challenges. So I think best place to kick off is history. Tell us how BECK dealt with the pandemic and some of those innovations.
Well, I think we all dealt with, as contractors, we all dealt with it in our own way to probably develop what has become or what became during that journey some common ways of working, and we were all looking. I remember when I don't know if you recall the very early days when there was Boris and his wash your hands and so on and all the rest of it that was going on. And I think when the first shutdown came, it was very much a case of just lock everything up and let's stop, because I don't think a lot of us as contractors really understood what was going on, and I don't think anyone knew how to react. I think the fact that we did is largely down to the adaptability and the way that the industry can change very, very quickly. And I think we do that. I think we do that by nature. I think that's what the industry is all about. Even from the very almost nomadic style of pitching up on a new job, starting a new job, delivering a job, and then doing it again. I think that change exists in that psyche somewhere. But we had to initially we shut everything up and then took a view of what it was we could do, and began to look over the parapet and see what was outside. And this all happened very, very fast, if you recall, in the first few weeks. And I think one or two I recall, I'm not sure if it was Wilmot or one of those, actually continued to work somehow. They were even faster out of the stalls. So they were a good model, I guess. Really it was a matter of very, very quickly using VPN to access remotely for our staff. We had about 150, I think, VPN access to in place very, very quickly the first few weeks. Any other sort of online platforms that we could use, much like this we're doing now. We wouldn't have been doing this possibly 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and then getting the message out to our staff very, very quickly, and what we felt was the right thing to do, and then what we expected them to do. It was clearly more difficult for the operational staff, because those guys on the ground, if we were going to open sites, needed to be on the ground.
Yeah.
For those guys that are office-based, we could keep them at home if they were able to work from home, and keep them there safe. And so all of that was every contractor was probably facing the same thing, but we were all facing the same challenges. And there wasn't a great deal to bring us together apart from the guidelines the government was issuing. So we had to keep a careful eye on that. I think as time evolved in that first 3 to 6 months, we became, whilst it was very, very difficult at times to assess what those specific guidelines from government meant, they needed interrogating to be sure we were clear. Having understood it and put the plans into place, we did, and I think the industry, again, it's not just, but let's be frank, it's the industry, we all developed safe systems of work where we could send people back and feel confident that they were going to come home safely. And putting those measures in place allowed us to just increase, improve, develop, and adapt more and more as time went on.
I've got a question for you. In terms of productivity drops, and then getting back to a point where you're achieving productivity pre-COVID standards, right? Would you say you ever or are back to pre-COVID productivity rates in terms of install speed, value, which is obviously reflected in valuations?
That's a good question, actually, because I can remember reviewing this about 6-7 months ago. If you look at, take Jumeirah Carlton Tower as an example, when that was a live project, had over 600 people on site daily. That reduced at the greatest peak. Let's say the peak of the I don't want to call it a pandemic, the peak of what we were going through. Because I guess we're not really over it yet, but the peak of what we were going through, I think we were struggling to get half that number on site. We were struggling to create space, the system, but it did slowly improve, and I think it's continued to improve as this summer has gone on. And yeah. I would say now, if we weren't 3 or 6 months ago, I would say now we're pretty much normal volume on site, pretty much. So you would say that. So you'd say within sort of a year and a half of the original lockdown, we're back to pre-lockdown productivity. However, we've now obviously got the twin challenges of IR35, which arguably is less of a challenge now than material shortages. Yeah, look, I mean, just before we come on to the material shortages in the IR35 issue, just to cap that, being back to productivity levels that were pre-pandemic, I would stress that I think we're back to that level of output, but with a completely different set of controls in place.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
Because we are working with the issue of COVID-19 still in the workplace, aren't we? Let's be frank.
Yes.
So we do have to still live by a regime, work by a regime, and monitor all that goes with it. So yeah, there are new working practices that have come on from that issue. Going on to your point of the IR35 thing, I don't think that's going to massively impact us because of our method of procurement, frankly. It certainly shouldn't, I can't see it affecting our supply chain too much, yeah? And I think it's more likely to affect our staffing levels, but we've always been a business that is pretty firm down the traditional PAYE route. We don't use a lot of freelancers. Most of our employees have been with the business a long time. We don't have a massive staff churn here. So retention is very, very good in that sense. And so recruits are, we try and pick the best after a PAYE type route, not, if the freelancers have a role to play, they always will have a role to play. But they're more in our business, they more or less tended to be the gap fillers. Yeah.
In terms of percentages, what would you say historically? Sort of 90-10, 90 PAYE, 10% more flexible freelance?
In our business?
Yeah.
I'd say it's a higher percentage PAYE than that. I'd say it's 95.5.
That's good. So here's another shout for you. In terms of the last 15 years, what I have witnessed isn't just a softening and a broader, more warm appeal of BECK in terms of principal contracting and specialist subcontracting offering, right? Which has resulted in business growth, but also it's the size of jobs. I remember first meeting Andre actually on site at Four Seasons, and that was a big job for the time. I think that finally counted about 85 million quid, right? At the time. But at the time, that was a bit of a one-off. At the time, there was maybe one of those a year. And obviously the difference now is, in terms of your project portfolio, you're probably doing 4 of those a year, right? So in terms of the stresses and strains or demands on your resource allocation, have you not found that more challenging?
No, I think it simplifies it actually, because the skill set we have at senior level in the business is able to operate and deliver major projects, large projects. If anything, we may, through our hotels and residential sort of side, our interior side of the business, lost the focus on those smaller jobs. And the larger jobs now, we're talking over 25, 30. We have an absolute ability in the business to deliver those projects now. If we were to look to go and secure a £5 million job or a £10 million job tomorrow, I'd have to sort of, I think as a team, we'd have to look at what we've got available that we could put on it, It's not to say we can't, but I mean, clearly we could, but a greater part of the reason for our growth, has been those larger projects. Now, whether or not that's because there are less contractors in London to deliver, whether or not there's more projects in London to deliver, I don't really know. I've not analysed it, but it certainly seems that those big projects have been out there for the last few years more than I would have recognised or seen them a decade ago.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think personally, I think it's a combination of factors. I think volume in market is one of the factors. I also think fundamentally there's been a falling away of your traditional competitors. You've had CISC, who now don't offer a refurb offering in the hotel market. You've got Chorus, who've obviously been shut. So I would argue that really, and we're seeing this, aren't we, in tendering currently, that it's really Ardmore who are coming through as possibly the challenge. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, it's a competitive market. construction has always been about competition, and I think that's healthy for clients. So yeah, it needs to continue like that, doesn't it? There's some great companies out there, some doing what we do, many not. But I think that I think our one of our sort of probably an unwritten core value actually is we play our own game, and let the others do what they do. So we want to focus on maintaining our values for what we deliver, because we can actually change that, and we can affect that. We can't know what it does.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think you're bang on. Ultimately, if you keep providing quality, and that quality runs from client interface through the organisation, from your recruitment strategy to your fabrication strategy to your delivery strategy, installation strategy, commissioning strategy, ultimately you're going to attract clients who want to use BECK.
We hope so. Yeah, we hope so.
Okay. Right, you highlighted a couple of things there, which I thought was really interesting. Operational staff as opposed to office-based staff, in terms of how the business has dealt with them going through the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest challenges that have faced our clients, I would argue, is the almost dichotomy of need. So sites can't run themselves. You need people on sites running jobs, right? Although there's some who would even disagree with that. Right. However, there are certain functions within the business, whether it's design management or surveying, again, arguably, or pre-construction, that don't necessarily have to be working from a base. They could be working remotely. Again, whether or not that gains you the best productivity in comparison to your competitors is another question. My question to you is, how have you found, or have you found any cultural challenges in terms of how your site staff feel about those who aren't site-based, who have been allowed a greater level of flexibility?
Oh, crikey. That's almost a HR type question, isn't it, really, I guess. I don't think we've had that issue. I mean, there's been voiced to me once or twice visiting sites that some people seem to be able to work from home. Can I work from home? Well, no, clearly you can't. We've had to have that conversation. I mean, it's been a case of where we can, we've continued, and we've tried to place those people into we have placed, I'm quite convinced we've placed those people in a safe environment in all circumstances. Now, if we can have an operational team on site actively delivering, and the commercial team need to be there for a variety of different reasons, they will be there. And so long as we can safely do that, there has been more and more working from home from commercial guys, because they don't need to visit site every day. They don't necessarily need to be based on site. So sometimes that's been workable. From a design manager perspective, I mean, those guys have had to be very adaptable when you think about it, because most of their meetings, DTMs, can take place via Teams. So that's quite a lot. They can work remotely, so we've had to set them up. So their visits to site probably have reduced most, I guess. I don't think we've had a circumstance of envy anywhere. Why is he doing it and I can't? I've heard that rumoured once or twice, but I don't think I've seen that. I think the good thing is, I'm going to use that word collaborative again. I think we have worked together as a business. We've definitely done it. I think as an industry, we've also done
it. Okay, that's interesting. And again, what you've highlighted there is the business has worked flexibly. It's worked in a bespoke fashion in terms of, the solution per individual, or certainly the solution per vertical, is dependent on the need of the business to have that person working on site or not, or working from home or not. But you've found as a business that hasn't caused you cultural issues.
No.
It's good.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, I mean, in fact, some people, and I think there is a degree of, clearly, because we're going to move on over the next few years, there's going to be some of these policies and procedures retained to a degree. And I think that the likes of design managers, for example, won't need to always travel into London 5 days a week. They can live outside of London and work outside of London from home, if that's and I think if they want to do that and it's efficient, why not? You know, we're not I don't think we're a table banging business where we tell our staff, you've got to do that. It's not how we operate, really. I don't think it is.
And again, and it comes back to not being autocratic and not having a one-size-fits-all approach, which is really good.
Well, I can remember just very quickly, just on a note quickly to that, and it's just a small point. I can remember back in the early days and during that first 6 months from the initial lockdown, if you remember that, taking calls various locations, taking calls from our staff, and I'm sure the other board directors did the same, because we all discussed this, and with our guys coming up with ideas of how we could operate on site, or how we could do things differently, or they could travel, whether or not some jobs we were looking at busing people in, you know. We were looking at all different methods. I mean, some worked and some didn't, but everyone had ideas, and I think that's crucially what allowed us to get through that period relatively successfully. I've got to say, relatively successfully, because, you know, we didn't have a massive drop in turnover last year on what was potentially had a massive impact in it, you know.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think the message again is bespoke solutions. It's about catering to need, and it's about warmly collaborating with stakeholders and coming out with the best outcomes. And actually, obviously, sitting here as a recruiter, I can say that I saw very few, in terms of your bleed of staff, very few BECK CVs on the market. There were very few people, very few employees who felt aggrieved. One thing I would say about the business in terms of the outcomes that a lot of your competitors are facing now is that there's been significant bleed from key principal contractors who, rightly or wrongly, their staff have felt that they handled the pandemic poorly, you know, whether it was cuts in salaries or cuts in bonuses or not allowing flexible working or whatever it is. What I think BECK has managed to achieve over the period through your approach is you've managed to retain the positive engagement with your staff. And I think that's a really big plus.
I think we did. I mean, you mentioned core values earlier. I think we did stick by our values, and I don't think we allowed it to dissuade us too much. Clearly we had to adapt, and as you said, change to suit the circumstances. I think as well, you know, a shout should go out to client teams as well, because you know, client teams weren't all over this like a rash saying we've got a problem, where are your people? You know, I think they woke up to the fact there was an issue here as well, and you know, I can think of at least one circumstance, as I think more and more come to mind, where, you know, we were on through this media or on the telephone to our client teams, discussing how we could best approach the problem and find solutions, and we did that. That was very collaborative also. So yeah, it was a lot of people needed to work together, didn't they?
Yeah, it did. And on a sort of our final piece, Roy, what do you see the challenges over the next 6 to 12 months? And what have you got any foresight in terms of how BECK's going to deal with it?
I think the greatest challenge is the availability of people and material. I think that's going to be. I think we're seeing signs of that now. I think there was an outflow of resource during the pandemic. and I think that we've got to try and get that back. I think we also, because of factory shutdowns, because let's face it, those guys are in one location, much more difficult to do what we did, and make work. There was clearly a period where productivity would have been down, and of course that takes time to gear back up again. And I think there is going to be a shortfall of materials as a consequence of that. As well, I think there's another issue in there, and if you look at it into the sort of looking at the fishbowl type approach, client teams, I can't find evidence of this. I probably could if I went searching for it, but client teams clearly put some projects on ice or slowed the process down over the last 2 years. And I think there has been more come to the fore in the last 8 months, and I think that's going to continue. And what we probably have now is an increased volume of work, and I think we have got an issue there as an industry, not just BECK. I think as an industry.
I think one of the big challenges that I'm hearing about is exactly as you've said, as a result of inventories going down to zero, fabricators not fabricating, right, because of factory shutdowns, raw materials not getting fabricated, right? You've got acute shortages. Those acute shortages have led to inflation, right? The biggest problem I'm seeing is, lump sum quotes valid for 48 hours, right? Procurement routes, right? Procurement routes being pushed towards two-stage because there are at least 3 contractors that I've spoken to now who just won't offer a lump sum price. And on top of that, cost plans just being wrong within the space of months, which again causes a concertina effect, doesn't it? Because ultimately there's now this rush now to get to market to try and get a price that is within maybe 10% of where it is now, because next year it might be 20 or 30% more.
Yeah. I mean, all of that we can only deal with it as we see fit and as it arises. I mean, a lot of we've always had that a bit of that in the industry, haven't we? So it's as I said earlier, competition and price increases are all part of the risk of building and contracting. So it's just something we have to deal with, Tony.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Roy, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insight. Fingers crossed for the work wins, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, Roy.
Thanks very much, Tony. See you soon.